Well, we're on the campaign trail now, and everybody says, Biden's hiding. Well, let me tell you something. We're doing very well. We're following the guidelines of the medical profession. We're following the guidelines of the experts, of the Dr. Fauci's of the world. We're doing very well, and matter of fact, we're winning if you look at all the polling data. I'm not saying that's going to last till November. I don't know enough to know that. But right now, the idea that somehow we are being hurt by my keeping to the rules and following the instructions that have been put forward by the docs is absolutely bizarre. I reject the premise that somehow this is hurting us. There's no evidence of that. I'm following the rules. Following the rules. The president should follow the rules instead of showing up at places without masks and the whole thing.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He wins that.
Yeah.
Every time.
Checkmate.
He wins that.
Checkmate.
Every time.
Yeah.
Willie, I mean, I understand the president and some people inside the White House. Most of them understand they're whistling past a political graveyard. But, Donald Trump snubbing doctors' advice in the middle of a pandemic that's killed now over 80,000 people. We have new estimates it's going to kill 140,000, 150,000 people after Donald Trump snubbed doctors' advice early on and said this was nothing to worry about. He loses to a dude who says, hey, I'm going to follow the doc's advice. Because guess what? Most Americans are following their doc's advice, following the advice of the doctor. So, I mean, Joe Biden's right. Doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. He's doing what most Americans are doing. He's not showing up with automatic or semi-automatic weapons and military-style weapons, trying to open up barber shops, or not showing up in the Michigan legislature with semi-automatic weapons, like to try to make a political show. He's not getting out in public, not wearing a mask to make a political show of it. People understand. They see what happens to people inside the White House when everybody else around them is wearing a mask, but they're not. Guess what happens to them? Hold on. Guess what happens? They get coronavirus. You have to follow your doctor's advice on the most deadly pandemic in over a century. It's that simple. Willie, Biden wins that contest every day of the week.
Yeah, and for people insisting that Joe Biden get out and campaign, it's not clear where they would like him to go out and campaign. He's going to rope line in Scranton. There's not going to be anybody on the other side of that rope line. So he's doing what the doctors have said he's supposed to do. I think the concerns, and they come from Democrats, reflect the larger concern and the urgency that they feel of beating Donald Trump. And they want to make sure that Joe Biden and his campaign are doing everything possible in every moment to make sure they win, because Jonathan Lemire, despite the way the president has performed during this pandemic, he's going to be a tough opponent in the fall. Democrats know that. And he has raised a ton of money quietly over the last few months, much more than the Biden campaign and Democrats have.
No question, Willie. The president's campaign manager, Brad Parscale, has taken to Twitter the last few days and say that they've built the Death Star and they're going to unleash a series of brutal attacks at Joe Biden. Now, perhaps Mr. Parscale didn't see how that movie ended and what happened to the Death Star. But what we're seeing here is they do have a financial advantage. Although the Biden camp did have a pretty good fundraising quarter this last time. They nearly matched the Republicans. Now they've got a long way to go. Trump had a huge head start. But we are seeing that from Joe Biden. And in fact, my colleagues at the Associated Press talked to his campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon, for a story that moved last night. And she's quoted as saying, quote, "Voters don't give a blank about where he's filming from. What they care about is what he's saying and how we connect with them." And that's where we are. And Joe and I have been fondly reminiscing about William McKinley's Front Porch campaign in recent days. And that's where we're seeing it's been we've been talking about it more than perhaps we should. But that's where Joe Biden is right now. They feel like he needs to stay home. First of all, that is simply he's following the guidelines. He's following precautions. He's taking his own safety seriously and those around him. But he's also trying to set an example a little bit for the public. And, of course, there's a political advantage here. They realize right now the best thing they can do is just get out of Donald Trump's way. That the more Donald Trump speaks, we see the President Trump speaks, the more we see his poll numbers fall. We see him, as much as Trump is trying to sort of re-engage with the world. He went to Arizona 2 weeks ago. He's slated to go to Pennsylvania, Allentown, not too far from Scranton, later this week. But right now, we saw, after he curtailed the briefings, he finally had one again on Monday. Again, it devolved into myth-truths and fights with reporters. So the Biden camp right now, they're very comfortable with where they are. They're very comfortable with the vice president, for now, staying home. They know it'll get harder. They know this summer and fall, he'll have to engage more with the president, who will be a tough opponent. But right now, they're happy to keep him in his basement.
Well, and, Willie, I remember, several years ago, maybe in 2008, maybe even earlier than that, Peggy Noonan was talking about how she would like to see a candidate do a front porch campaign, and talked about why it would be so effective. Alex reminds me that Mike Barnicle, though, in contrast to McKinley's front porch campaign, Barnicle's campaign is get off my porch campaign. So not quite as effective yelling at the kids.
He's been running that campaign for his whole life, Joe.
Yeah.
See.
I actually think Joe Biden's basement campaign provides such a stark contrast to the circus, to the ridiculous, horrific sideshow that the president puts on almost on a daily basis, consistently wrong, consistently dangerous, consistently mean, consistently often bullying people, and even sometimes with a splash of racism just to distract.
Just a dash.
Just a dash. Yeah. And honestly, arguing whether or not Joe Biden is doing enough right now when he's doing exactly the right thing, which is following the guidelines, and truly wishing this president was doing a better job and was focused on the pandemic, truly from the bottom of his heart, worried about this. What more can he do but step aside and let this ridiculous you-know-what show play out, because the American people can see it? Well, it's the same argument about showing the briefings.
Yeah,
it's revealing to the American people what they've got as a president.
Well, and it's Tom Nichols, who actually tweeted a couple of days ago, please keep doing the briefings every day, Mr. President. As one who wants to see the president lose, Tom and a lot of other people understand the truth, as do people in the White House, as do the president's White House staff, as do the president's campaign members, as do the president's financial supporters, that him holding those briefings hurt him and hurt his political standing and hurt Republicans as well. So, campaigns are about contrast.
Yeah.
Right now you have a guy who's supposed to be in charge, who said he's like a wartime president, thumbing his nose at all the rules, which maybe people thought that was cool during the 2016 campaign, to talk about beating up people, having them beat up people and to pay for their legal fees. Maybe they thought, oh, he's shaking things up. They don't feel that way. And they shouldn't have felt that way in 2016. They don't feel that way now when it's not some poor protester that's getting beaten up. It's their mom or their dad or their grandparents or their children or their own lives that are at risk.
Yeah. The argument that the White House is making right now is we must open up the economy in the middle of a pandemic with no testing and no vaccine on a mass level.
Well, they should listen to Dr. Fauci. They should listen to Dr. Fauci. But they should follow the White House guidelines. And testing is improving. Testing needs to continue improving. They need to do the testing and the tracing and the isolating and the treatment, all the things that people have been talking about for months.
Coming up on Morning Joe.
We don't know everything about this virus, and we really better be very careful, particularly when it comes to children, because the more and more we learn, we're seeing things about what this virus can do that we didn't see from the studies in China or in Europe. For example, right now, children presenting with COVID-19, who actually have a very strange inflammatory syndrome, very similar to Kawasaki's syndrome. I think we better be careful if we are not cavalier in thinking that children are completely immune to the deleterious effects.
We'll talk about that dangerous syndrome that Dr. Fauci mentioned next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.